Hi, I'm Jon Atack,
I'm Sam Atack.
and today we're going to talk about deception as the basis of mind control, manipulation, brainwashing, whatever term you want to use. Many years ago, I had a phone conversation with my friend Joy Caton, who ran Deo Gloria Outreach, which, yes. was a Christian group. She was great. And the late Joy Caton, I should say. And somehow the concept of mind control came up. And she said, I don't really believe in mind control. That's not my concern. My concern is deception. And another mutual friend of Joy's and mine, the wonderful Christian Shirko, he and I agree that there's a book written by Kaiser and Keiser, misleading names slightly. They didn't rule Germany at any point. Thomas Kaiser was a psychotherapist who started working with members of authoritarian groups, which we were still allowed to call cults back in those days, back in the 70s. Oh, remember the 70s? No, not really.
No, I don't remember the 70s.
It's strange, that, isn't it? And there is this wonderful book, quite rare, which Christian and I absolutely recommend. It's called The Anatomy of Illusion. And in case it's so rare that Spike can't find a picture, she'll probably have me make a copy of the frontispiece.
I mean, it's an interesting, because Thomas Kaiser comes from a psychotherapeutic background, and he notices a sort of cultic...
When you say psychotherapeutic...
That's a new word. Psychotherapeutic.
Therapeutic.
I can't say that.
Psychotherapeutic.
Yeah, and he notices the same sort of cultic patterns of behaviour in those. And then he moves on to cults.
Yeah, I mean, he says that whenever Carl Rogers or Fritz Perls or one of the great luminaries of the humanistic counselling movement was around, there'd be devotees worshipping them. And I think there is a lot of that. I think we do tend to elect heroes and fight for beliefs rather than thinking for ourselves.
And there's an example in there of somebody just making up their own psychotherapy. I can use the same word. Psychotherapeutic.
Psychotherapeutic
tradition.
Psychotherapy.
And finding that it worked, basically, just because of the idea of expertise.
Where is the entry on that?
It's right at the start.
It is, isn't it? Says a clinical psychologist, Tom witnessed early in his training the deification of the grand old men of encounter, Abraham Maslow, Fritz Perls, Carl Rogers, and progeny, the progeny of these people. Colleagues would swoon at professional association meetings where these luminaries appeared to lecture on their latest insights. There was something suspicious in the way fellow psychotherapists seemed to worship the doctrines promoted by these individuals. The attitudes displayed by converts to the numerous schools of psychotherapy could only be called religious. They are new religious movements, as of course is sociology. The esteem with which the most prestigious encounter group theorists were held was cultish. So talking about Tom Kaiser, the co-author of the book, later when he matured as a therapist during the 1970s at Lafayette Clinic in Detroit, he supervised pre- and postdoctoral psychologists and resident psychiatrists and found them willing to accept a viewpoint merely on the basis of the theorist. But even more alarming was his observation that patients, even very sophisticated patients, doctors and lawyers, would put up with incompetent and even bizarre abuse of the therapy hour merely because a psychotherapist was a prestigious person in their eyes. It was in the late 1970s that he encountered the works of George Kelly, who promoted his theoretical position under the pedantic title Constructive Alternativism. Kelly maintained that any theory of human behaviour must account for why there were so many theories of human behaviour. In short, an adequate theory must say something meaningful about theorists. Kelly had found that deliberately exposing his patients to contrived psychoanalytic interpretations, some even inconsistent with each other, made no real difference in the effectiveness of treatment. So Kaiser's departure accelerated from traditional psychotherapy law. So he's an innovator. He's a fascinating and wonderful guy. And Sam dug out, because for me this is a very important book. I read it in the 1980s, in another century, and Sam is sort of gradually going through the books that I think are important. And I must say that for me, because I've very rarely been guided in my study, that I've read an awful lot of books that really weren't very useful. And so it's a good thing, to have somebody who has picked out.
Yes, absolutely. It makes it a lot easier, especially since I'm quite a slow reader. So
me too.
Yeah.
Very slow reader.
Page every 10 minutes.
Yeah, if you're lucky.
Which is going to make this reading very difficult.
So this is Thomas and Jaqueline Keiser from The Anatomy of Illusion, talking about deception.
No. Destructive persuasion is premised on a hidden agenda. A religious fanatic who attempts to convert others to his cause is not using destructive persuasion in our sense if he does not strategically control information and covertly manipulate a convert's needs. If he harbours no hidden motives such as a desire for wealth or political influence, his crusade should not be considered destructive persuasion, regardless of how alien his ideas.
He may be a lunatic, but he's not deceiving anybody, so it isn't destructive persuasion or coercive control, mind control.
I guess that sort of takes mainstream religion out of the...
Yeah, people who believe, though as Martin Gardner pointed out, you can be both a crank and a charlatan.
Yes. Yeah.
So there are people on the borderline there. I think a lot of the televangelists who've fallen, like Jim Baker, for example, or Benny Hinn, who hasn't fallen and should have done, that they are deceptive. They really know they're tricking people.
Absolutely. Yeah. While many of us do not take such advertisements seriously, there will always be those who are deceived. We may wink at such distortions, but one would scarcely be willing to say that deliberate distortion of reality for personal gain is desirable under any circumstances. It is the clearest possible perception of reality that adapts us for mental, spiritual, and physical survival. Even the mildest distortions desensitize us, dulling our sense of reality. Deception, however trivial, is still deception, and when we are unaware of it in relatively innocent forms, we run the risk of becoming insensitive to it on a larger scale.
Yeah. And it's so easily done that somebody feels... I remember a great talk by a forensic psychologist called Brian Tully, and he talked about... He interviewed white-collar criminals, that was his job, and he said he just heard the same thing over and over again. The boss came in and said, "Oh, that contract needs to have yesterday's date on it. Do you mind?" And that was the first increment of dissonance, the first step towards him ending up in a police interview room talking about the millions he'd embezzled or what have you. But so often this is a very important point, that this willingness to lie, and a lie is a deliberate deception, the willingness to lie, to say, we've done this, we've got this, we are this, that is manipulation.
Are there situations where it's all right to lie, to deceive?
I think that if you're defending people, say that you're in North Korea and somebody's trying to arrest you or arrest your mum for something, then yes, there are of course situations where in the defence of somebody, I don't believe that we're not under any legal obligation to tell the truth, except when we're under oath. I think also people are far too willing to offer private and secret information about themselves. Look at the 80 million Facebook accounts that were hacked in The Great Hack, wonderful documentary, on behalf of Cambridge Analytica and the Trump campaign and the Brexit campaign in this country for aggregate IQ. That they found 5,000 pieces of information for every person over the age of 18 in the United States. And that was whether you were on the internet or not, because people talk about other people.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of information. We probably need to be... It surprised me putting up, surveys on a website and finding how many people want to answer all of these questions. And I was sort of, these questions are a little bit intrusive,
Yeah.
Or in Scientology, indeed, where you're given a 200-question personality test, which tells them everything about you. The amazing thing is they don't use it for anything other than to con you into joining up. They don't actually go back to that personality test and do anything with it, which, given it's an incredible mine of information, and given that they are fundamentally an intelligence agency, is a surprising oversight. So I hope if David Miscavige is watching, that he will include that in the methods of spying upon the members. No, yes. I don't. That's not at all true. I've been through so many different expressions about influence and negative influence upon other people. There are so many of them. Menticide, brainwashing,
yes, yeah.
Thought reform. I like Margaret Singer's exploitative persuasion because it tells you what it means.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our friend Steve Hassan, when he talks about mind control, has to say there are positive and negative forms of mind control. And I'm already wondering, I'm going, well, for me, mind control is what the CIA and Canadian and British intelligence tried to do with their projects, wiping people's minds and turning them into Manchurian candidates. That may be possible. It may be that Sirhan Sirhan, for example, was put through such a program. We know that the Unabomber was. That he went through a mind control program, but I don't think that was what they wanted him to do.
No, it just messed him up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I eventually, coercive control is a useful expression, undue influence is useful, but I long ago came down to just manipulation. Manipulation is, it comes from manus, meaning the hands. And when you throw a clay pot, you're manipulating the clay to do that. But I think by dictionary definition, it is where you seek to influence another person when you have a hidden agenda. So they're being deceived. Now, sadly, this takes place in all sorts of areas. Think, for example, about a police interview, that where you get the good cop, bad cop, you're being tricked. There's a deception involved in this. So it could be said that this is exploitative persuasion. Now, the rules of criminal justice are a lot stronger here than they are in most places in the world, because we had the Guildford 4, the Birmingham 6, situations where the police had coerced false confessions, therefore letting the perpetrators of these atrocities go completely free.
Yes.
And putting people in prison. I showed you the film In the Name of the Father with Daniel Day-Lewis, where we find out the Guildford 4 basically were sat playing cards when it happened.
Yes.
And suffered many years in prison, including the father, who was not anywhere near the scene when it happened. Terrible. Yeah. But that meant that there was a revision of the rules of evidence in this country, so everything has to be recorded, and there is a more ethical approach to interview, which is a good thing.
It's also rife in politics, as we
deception is fundamental, isn't it? So they're manipulating. They are seeking to coercively control.
So, what do you do about manipulation? If it's fundamental as deception, do you become more cautious?
Yes, I think you check things in a friendly fashion, not aggressively. But if somebody, one of the things I love about my partner is that if I say anything that she doesn't make sense to her, she questions it, and sometimes I prove to be right.
Good.
But I think as a parent, that my attitude is anything I say, you can. Yeah. You can absolutely check and question, and if I'm wrong, I'll send you to your room. I think in a larger way, one of the things I would like to see is that politicians, if a lawyer goes into court, they don't have to take an oath. It's considered that what they say, they are permanently under oath when speaking to a judge, which is as it should be. It doesn't mean that there aren't a load of lying lawyers. There are, I'm afraid. I met a mafia lawyer once. Very briefly, I was introduced to this young man in a silk suit and he was very scary. And I'm glad that we didn't meet again.
Yes.
And because he might have made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and I'm sleeping with the Fishers.
Yeah.
But I think in politics, one of the things that bothers me is I think politicians, when they're on the floor of the House, when they're in Congress or House, Parliament, whatever their place is called, the Vitanigemot, or whatever we want to call it, the Bundestag, that when they are there, anything they say must be true.
Yeah.
And if it can be demonstrated that they lied while on the floor of the House, there should be some punishment. Probably they should be dismissed as a senator, congressman, member of parliament. And there should be a certain period of time before they can stand again, something like that. Yeah. Now, there is a very severe instance of this. I am not given to taking sides, as you know, particularly. I dislike all people equally, as Stuart Lee puts it. But I have contempt for the political parties for the most part. They've proved to be full of terrible people. Cyril Smith, for example, who was a Liberal MP in this country for many years, it was later found out that he was abusing children. And when David Steele, who would later be the head of the Liberal Democrat Party, admitted that he had had suspicions, he was quite rightly reprimanded by the party for not having done anything about it. But for me, one of the worst offences was when Margaret Thatcher, as Prime Minister, stood up on the floor of the House and insisted that the Argentinian vessel, the Belgrano, which went down with hundreds of lives lost, had been inside the exclusion zone that had been declared, if you come in, he'll get you. She knew that wasn't true. She'd personally given the order for the sinking of the Belgrano. And, she causes heated arguments in this country still. There are people who love Baroness Thatcher, the late Baroness Thatcher, and there are people who detest her and would like to, as I think Elvis Costello put it, dance on her grave.
Okay, yeah.
I don't feel so passionately. I think some of the things she did were like helping to ban chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, because she had a degree in chemistry, the only scientist ever to be Prime Minister. We largely get people who went to Eton School as Prime Ministers. We've got the 21st old Etonian, Boris Johnson, as Prime Minister now. Yeah. David Cameron went to Eton as well.
But we'd like our milk back.
Yeah, Thatcher, milk snatcher. There's an arcane reference for anybody in America. When she was Minister for Education, before becoming Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher stopped the daily third of a pint of milk that all school children got, which was probably a bad thing. Yeah. It's probably good for children to have a third of a pint of milk every day.
Unless they're lactose intolerant.
Unless they're lactose intolerant, in which case, which many people are, of course, except for North Europeans. Anyway, the deception, corruption, injustice, these are the foundations of a failing society. This is why our society is having so much trouble, because we have elected, through our faulty systems, we have elected liars and narcissists into positions of power, and we allow corruption and deception to go forward. So while the penalties might be trivial, one might have small penalties for these things, it should still be naming and shaming, that where somebody has deliberately told an untruth and that has had consequences. I mean, it's not an everyday matter, and I'm not going to get into the white lies of, not telling somebody what their Christmas present is or what have you.
Yeah, it's silly.
Not bothered about that. But often they're very serious things. And when we're dealing with authoritarian groups, authoritarian cult groups, then they tell big porkies. Yes. They tell awful lies about what they're seeking to do. And what they are seeking to do always is sell you their ideas and get you to buy into their beliefs, so that and it's a separation. If you join, if you go to a convent or a monastery, and I do have some problems at the moment with, we've just had news of the death of many babies in Irish Catholic institutions under the Magdalen College, the barbarous Magdalen College system. And the babies that didn't die were being sold to America. So I do have problems with some of these institutions. But if you join a convent or a monastery, you're told what's going to happen. You know it's going to be a hard life. If you join the Moonies or Scientology, you're not told what life is like. You know, you're sold
the increments of dissonance build up.
Yeah, very rapidly.
Yes.
No, I was very lucky that I didn't end up in the Sea Organisation working a 90-hour week for $5 and being bullied and badgered all the time so that we could clear the planet. I'm not bothered about clearing the planet. I just like people in public office to be truthful. And for that to be important, people who fake reports. I've seen this. I've seen hospital records faked, for example, for one of my family members. And it was a shock, and it was admitted. We did get an admission of it, but nothing happened. Nobody was disciplined. And for me, that's a serious thing, deliberately falsifying records. Yeah. So a stronger attitude towards deception, more forgiveness towards people who offer up the truth, and definitely great support for whistleblowers. You know, we've had some criticism from one guy because Mike Rinder, my friend who I've interviewed, he hasn't gone round and apologised to everybody that he hurt in the 20-year period. That was his job. He hasn't told the whole story of everything he did. I doubt he could remember it because of the stress he was under while doing it. But I think that Mike should be honoured because we should encourage people, if they have been involved in corrupt or deceptive practices, to come forward and put it right.
Absolutely.
So I think that's about all I have to say about that.
Anyway, 25 minutes anyway.
That's way too long.
Yeah.
But about 10 minutes of that will be cut out, probably.
Yes, that's right.
So thank you very much. I'm Jon Atack.
I'm Sam Atack.
Hi, Jon here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.
Oh, remember the 70s? No, not really.
No, I don't remember the 70s.